I won millions in the lottery, and I decided not to tell anyone. I asked my family for help as my name is Jade, 34 years old from Denver, Colorado. I was just an ordinary administrative assistant until last year when I checked my lottery ticket and discovered I won $47 million. My hands shook as I stared at those numbers in disbelief. That moment changed everything, but I made a decision nobody expected. I told no one about my winnings. Instead, I crafted an experiment to see who truly cared about me by asking my family for financial help. Looking back, I never imagined how this test would completely transform my life. Before we dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more shocking true stories like mine. I grew up in a small town just outside of Denver, Colorado. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. My parents both worked steady jobs, my dad as an insurance salesman and my mom as a nurse at the local hospital. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with a small backyard where my sister Amanda and I would spend hours playing make-believe games. Those were simple, happy times before everything changed. When I turned 12, the fighting between my parents became impossible to ignore. They tried to hide it at first, hushed arguments behind closed doors late at night, but eventually those arguments spilled into our daily lives. I remember coming home from school one day to find my mother crying at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her. Those papers, I later learned, were divorce documents. The split was messy. Our family home was sold, and suddenly my life was divided between my mom's small 2-bedroom apartment and my dad's new house across town where he lived with his new wife, Diane. My mother took the divorce hard. She picked up extra shifts at the hospital to make ends meet, often working 16-hour days. I would come home from school to an empty apartment, responsible for starting dinner and helping Amanda with her homework, until Mom dragged herself home, exhaustion etched into the lines of her face. Dad, on the other hand, seemed to bounce back quickly. Within a year of the divorce, he married Diane, a real estate agent, with a sharp smile and designer clothes. They bought a house in the affluent part of town with a swimming pool and 3-car garage. Dad started talking about investments and property values instead of asking about our school projects or friends. Each time Amanda and I visited for our court-mandated weekends, the gap between our two lives seemed to widen. Despite the financial struggles, I managed to do well in school. When it came time for college applications, I threw myself into scholarship essays, knowing it was my only shot at higher education. I was ecstatic when I received a partial scholarship to the University of Colorado. It wasn't enough to cover everything, so I took out student loans for the rest, promising myself I would pay them back as quickly as possible after graduation. College was a balancing act of classes, homework, and part-time jobs. I worked at the university coffee shop in the mornings as a library assistant in the evenings and took babysitting jobs on weekends. Sleep became a luxury, but I was determined to graduate without asking my struggling mother for money or my increasingly distant father for help. After graduation, I landed a job as an administrative assistant at Williams & Boyer law firm in downtown Denver. The pay wasn't great, but it was stable. 8 years later, I was still there, having received modest raises, but no real opportunity for advancement. Each month, I dutifully paid my student loan bills, rent for my small 1-bedroom apartment, and kept my 15-year-old Honda running with regular maintenance and the occasional prayer. While I was treading water financially, Amanda's situation was even more precarious. She had gotten pregnant during her sophomore year of college with her boyfriend Jake. They tried to make it work for a while, but by the time their son Tyler turned 2, Jake had moved to California for a job opportunity, sending child support payments that were both inconsistent and insufficient. Amanda was forced to drop out of college to care for Tyler. She worked as a waitress at a local diner, but the unpredictable hours and meager tips barely covered rent for their tiny apartment. I helped when I could, buying groceries or new clothes for Tyler when he outgrew his old ones, but my own financial situation limited how much assistance I could provide. Tyler was now 6 years old, a bright, energetic boy with his mother's warm brown eyes and infectious laugh. I adored being his aunt, picking him up from school when Amanda worked late shifts, helping him with his kindergarten homework, and taking him to the park on weekends. He called me Auntie J, and his face would light up whenever I came to visit. Those moments were worth more than any amount of money in my bank account. My mother continued working at the hospital, though she had been forced to cut back her hours due to worsening arthritis in her hands and knees. Years of double shifts had taken their toll on her body. She lived in a small house she had managed to buy 5 years ago, her one source of pride and financial security. She still tried to help Amanda and Tyler whenever possible, babysitting or sending home leftovers from her famous Sunday dinners. My relationship with my father and Diane had grown increasingly strained over the years. Their occasional invitations to dinner seemed more like opportunities to showcase their growing wealth than genuine attempts to connect. Dad had been promoted to regional manager at his insurance company, and Diane's real estate business was thriving in Denver's booming housing market. Their conversations revolved around their latest vacation to Bali or the renovations on their vacation home in Aspen. They never asked about my modest career or Amanda's struggles as a single mother. Despite the financial stress and family complications, I maintained hope for the future. I was saving a small amount each month toward eventually going back to school for my master's degree. I dreamed of moving into a career with more growth potential, maybe in human resources or project management. I imagined being able to help Amanda finish her degree someday or contribute to Tyler's future college fund. Little did I know that a simple decision to buy a lottery ticket would completely transform these modest hopes into something far beyond my wildest imagination. It was a Tuesday evening when I stopped at the corner store on my way home from work. I needed milk and bread, and on a whim, I decided to spend $5 on a Mega Millions ticket. I rarely bought lottery tickets, maybe once every few months when the jackpot was especially high. This time, the jackpot had reached $253 million. As the cashier handed me the ticket, we joked about what we would do with all that money. I tucked the ticket into my wallet and promptly forgot about it. 2 days later, I was heating up leftover pasta for dinner and half watching the local news when they announced the Mega Millions drawing. I wasn't even paying full attention until the newscaster mentioned that a winning ticket had been sold in Denver. Something made me pause. I put down my fork and walked over to my purse, fishing out the crumpled lottery ticket from my wallet. My hands trembled slightly as I compared the numbers on my ticket to the winning numbers displayed on the screen. First number matched, second number matched. By the fourth matching number, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When all 6 numbers lined up perfectly, I sank to the floor, ticket clutched in my suddenly sweaty palm. I must have checked those numbers 20 times. I looked them up online, refreshed the page, and checked again. I even called the lottery hotline and listened to the automated voice recite the winning numbers. Each verification confirmed the impossible truth. I had won the Mega Millions jackpot. After the initial shock wore off slightly, I calculated what my actual winnings would be. I had chosen the lump sum option, which reduced the amount to about $140 million. After taxes, I would walk away with approximately $47 million. More money than I could comprehend. More money than I would earn in several lifetimes at my current job. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I paced my small apartment, mind racing with possibilities. I could pay off my student loans, buy a new car, purchase a house outright, help Amanda and Tyler, make sure my mom never had to work another day in her life. The options were dizzying, overwhelming in their scope. But as dawn broke and I watched the sunrise from my tiny balcony, another thought began to take shape. What would this money do to my relationships? I had read stories about lottery winners whose lives were destroyed by their sudden wealth. Families torn apart by greed, endless requests for money, friendships ruined by jealousy and resentment. I remembered an article about a man who won $30 million and was bankrupt within 5 years because he couldn't say no to family members and so-called friends. Another winner had been sued by her own siblings over promised gifts. Some winners even reported receiving death threats or having to move to escape the constant harassment. By morning, I had made a decision that would set me on a completely unexpected path. I would not tell anyone about my winnings, at least not immediately. I would claim the prize anonymously, which thankfully was possible in Colorado, and I would observe how people treated me without the knowledge of my new wealth. The next day, I called in sick to work and researched how to claim the prize while protecting my identity. I found a well-respected financial advisor named Maria Santos who specialized in sudden wealth management. Using most of my savings, I paid for an initial consultation. Maria's office was in a sleek downtown building with views of the mountains. As I explained my situation and my concerns, she nodded thoughtfully. We spent 3 hours discussing options for claiming the ticket tax implications and strategies for wealth management. By the end of our meeting, I had a plan. Maria would help me set up a blind trust to claim the winnings. She would connect me with an attorney to establish legal protections. Most importantly, she agreed to maintain absolute confidentiality. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with Maria and her recommended attorney, Thomas Weller. Together, we created the Mountain View Trust, a legal entity that would claim the prize and shield my identity. We set up a series of accounts and investments designed to protect and grow my newfound wealth. I signed more papers than I had in my entire life, initiated wire transfers, and created passwords for new accounts. Throughout this process, I maintained my normal routine. I returned to work, paid my bills, and visited Amanda and Tyler. No one suspected that anything had changed. Each night, I would stare at the ceiling, wondering if I was making the right choice by keeping this secret. During one of our meetings, I confessed to Maria my deepest fear. I'm afraid this money will show me who really cares about me and who just wants what I have. Maria's expression softened. That's a common concern among sudden wealth clients. Money doesn't change who you are, but it often reveals who others are. Her words solidified the idea that had been forming in my mind. What if I could test this theory? What if I could discover who would help me when I needed it before they knew about my wealth? The plan took shape over the following days. I would approach various family members with a fabricated financial crisis. I would claim to need a significant but not impossible sum of money for an urgent medical procedure not covered by my insurance. Then I would observe their reactions, see who offered to help and who turned me away. I felt a twinge of guilt about the deception, but rationalized that I would make it up to them later. This wasn't about punishing anyone, I told myself. It was about gaining clarity before I made decisions about sharing my wealth. With the legal structures in place and the money securely managed, I began to prepare for my experiment. I rehearsed my story, working out the details to make it believable, but not so specific that it could be easily verified. I decided on the amount, $8,000, substantial enough to require significant help, but not so large as to be completely out of reach for my more financially stable relatives. As I planned my approach to different family members, I found myself becoming anxious about what I might discover. Would my father, with his comfortable lifestyle and successful career, step up to help his daughter? Would my mother, despite her limited resources, offer what she could? How would Amanda, struggling to support herself, and Tyler respond to my need? The answers to these questions would shape the future of my relationships and determine how I would ultimately share my fortune. What had begun as a simple lottery ticket purchase had evolved into a complex moral experiment, one that would test the bonds of family and reveal truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The following Saturday, I drove to my father and stepmother's house in Cherry Hills Village, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the Denver metropolitan area. Their Tudor-style mansion sat on a meticulously landscaped acre lot with a circular driveway leading to the imposing front entrance. I parked my aging Honda between Diane's white Mercedes SUV and my father's black Tesla. The contrast between our vehicles, a stark reminder of our different financial situations. Before exiting my car, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had purposely forgone makeup and chosen a plain outfit, wanting to appear slightly disheveled without being obvious about it. I had rehearsed my story dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, my heart pounded with anxiety. Was I really going through with this deception? I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was doing this. This wasn't about tricking anyone, it was about understanding who would be there for me when it truly mattered. With that thought firming my resolve, I grabbed the homemade apple pie I had brought as a dinner contribution and walked to the front door. Diane answered immaculately, dressed in tailored cream pants and a silk blouse, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite it being a weekend. Her smile was polite but cool as she air-kissed my cheek and took the pie. "Jade, darling, how nice of you to bring dessert. We're having the Robertsons' personal chef prepare dinner tonight. Marcus is absolutely divine with seafood." I followed her through the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier and into the gourmet kitchen that was easily 3 times the size of my entire apartment. My father was there leaning against the marble island counter, drink in hand, engrossed in something on his phone. He looked up briefly when I entered. "There's my girl," he said, giving me a quick one-armed hug before returning his attention to his phone. "Sorry, just closing a deal with a client in Tokyo. Time zones, you know." The chef, a young man with a French accent, worked efficiently at the stove, barely acknowledging our presence. The kitchen smelled amazing, a blend of herbs and searing seafood. "Can I get you something to drink?" Diane offered. "We've just opened a lovely Sancerre that would pair beautifully with dinner." "Just water for now, thanks," I replied, not wanting alcohol to affect my ability to present my story convincingly. We moved to the sunroom to wait for dinner, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked their pool and expertly designed garden. Dad finally put his phone away and asked a few cursory questions about my job, though his eyes kept darting to the silent phone on the table beside him. "Still at that law firm?" he asked. "What is it now, 5 years?" "8 years, Dad," I corrected gently. "Williams and Boyer." Right, he nodded. "Ever think about going back for that law degree? Could put you on the other side of the desk, you know." Before I could answer, Diane jumped in. "Law is so competitive these days. My friend Meredith's daughter just graduated from Harvard Law and had to take a position at a public defender's office. Imagine Harvard Law and working for peanuts." The conversation drifted to their recent 3-week vacation in the south of France, Diane's extensive renovations to their vacation home in Aspen, and Dad's golf game. Not once did they ask about Amanda or Tyler, even though they knew Amanda was struggling as a single mother. During dinner, which was indeed exquisite with scallops, risotto, and vegetables I couldn't even name, I waited for an appropriate opening. The chef had departed after serving, leaving us alone in their formal dining room. "So, Jade," Diane said between delicate bites, "we haven't seen you at the club in ages. You should come for Sunday brunch sometime." I set down my fork. My stomach suddenly knotted with tension. "Actually, there's a reason I wanted to see you both today." Something in my tone must have alerted them, because they both looked at me with sudden attention. "Is everything okay, honey?" my father asked, though he still seemed distracted. I launched into the story I had carefully crafted. "I've been having some health issues lately. The doctors found something concerning, and I need a procedure that isn't covered by my insurance." Diane's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "What sort of procedure?" I had researched medical terminology to make my story convincing without being too specific. "It's a specialized treatment for a benign growth that's causing some complications. If left untreated, it could become more serious." "Well, I'm sure it's nothing to worry about," my father said dismissively. "These doctors always make things sound worse than they are to cover themselves legally." I pressed on my hands, slightly trembling beneath the table. "The problem is the cost. The procedure is $8,000, and I just don't have that kind of money right now." A heavy silence fell over the table. My father took a long sip of his wine, avoiding my eyes. Diane's smile had completely vanished. $8,000, my father finally said. That's quite a sum. I know, I said, injecting a note of desperation into my voice. I've tried to figure out payment plans, but with my student loans and rent, I just can't make it work. I was hoping maybe you could help me just until I can pay you back. My father and Diane exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Diane cleared her throat delicately. Jade, you know we would love to help, but we've just put a significant amount into renovating the Aspen house. The contractor went way over budget on the marble for the master bath. And I've recently made some important investments, my father added. All my liquid assets are tied up at the moment. I looked around at their lavish dining room, the expensive art on the walls, the designer furniture. The watch on my father's wrist had cost more than my car. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, I said quietly. I'm really worried about this medical issue. Diane reached across the table to pat my hand, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. Have you considered taking on a second job? Or perhaps looking into those medical credit cards? Or better insurance? My father suggested. You should really talk to your HR department about better coverage options. Your generation needs to be more proactive about financial planning, Diane added. At your age, I already had a substantial savings account for emergencies like this. My throat tightened as I realized what was happening. They weren't going to help me. Despite their wealth, despite being my father, they were refusing to assist with a medical issue they believed could seriously impact my health. I understand, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I'll figure something out. The conversation awkwardly shifted back to safer topics. Diane detailed their upcoming trip to Japan, and my father talked about a new client he had landed. I barely heard them picking at my food and nodding at appropriate intervals. By the time I left, clutching a container of leftover dessert Diane insisted I take home, the painful truth had settled in my chest like a stone. My father and his wife, surrounded by luxury and excess, were unwilling to help their daughter and stepdaughter with what they believed was a legitimate medical need. I managed to hold myself together until I reached my car, but once inside, safely hidden from view, I broke down. Tears streamed down my face as I gripped the steering wheel, the pain of rejection far worse than I had anticipated. This wasn't just about money. This was about care, about family, about what really mattered. As I drove away from their magnificent house, I wondered if my experiment had been a terrible mistake. Was it worth discovering these painful truths? What would I do with this knowledge once my lottery winnings became public? Through my tears, one thought provided a small measure of comfort. This was just the beginning of my experiment. There were other family members to approach, other relationships to test. Perhaps not everyone would fail as spectacularly as my father had. The next day, I drove to Amanda's apartment complex on the east side of Denver. Her building was older, with cracked concrete steps leading to the second-floor walk-up. Children's toys and bicycles cluttered the small common area, signs of families making do in cramped quarters. Amanda's apartment was small but clean, with mismatched furniture and colorful artwork, mostly Tyler's crayon masterpieces, decorating the walls. When I knocked, the door flew open and Tyler launched himself at me. "Auntie Jade, did you bring cookies?" His gap-toothed smile never failed to warm my heart. "Not today, buddy, but I promise next time," I said, hugging him tightly. Amanda appeared behind him, her brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes testifying to her exhaustion. Despite this, her smile was genuine as she embraced me. Come in. Sorry about the mess. Tyler's school project exploded all over the living room." The coffee table was indeed covered with construction paper glue sticks and what appeared to be a half-constructed solar system. I carefully navigated around Jupiter to sit on their worn couch springs creaking under my weight. Amanda offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. As she moved around the tiny kitchen, I noticed bills spread across the counter, some marked with red past due stamps. A calendar on the refrigerator was crowded with her work shifts, Tyler's school events, and reminders about utility payment deadlines. "Tyler, Why don't you work on your planets in your room for a bit? Auntie Jay and I need to talk grown-up stuff, Amanda suggested. Tyler groaned but gathered his project materials. Can we go to the park after? We'll see, buddy, Amanda promised as he reluctantly headed to his bedroom. Once we were alone, Amanda sank onto the couch beside me, exhaustion evident in her slumped shoulders. Sorry I haven't called much lately. The diner cut my hours again, so I've been picking up shifts at the convenience store on 4th Street. The timing works because I can go there after my diner shifts end. My heart ached hearing this. Amanda was working herself to the bone just to provide the basics for herself and Tyler. I felt a twinge of guilt about what I was about to do, knowing she had so little to spare. How are you really doing? I asked softly. Amanda sighed, running a hand through her hair. Honestly, it's been tough. Tyler needs new shoes again, the car needs repairs I can't afford, and Jake's child support was late again this month. She attempted a smile. But we're managing. Tyler's teacher says he's reading above grade level, so that's something to celebrate, right? I nodded, truly proud of my nephew's accomplishments, despite the challenges he faced. He's an amazing kid. Yeah, he is, Amanda agreed, love evident in her voice. So, what's up with you? You sounded serious on the phone. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and launched into the same story I had told my father about needing an expensive medical procedure that wasn't covered by insurance. As I spoke, Amanda's expression grew increasingly concerned, her eyes filling with worry. Jade, that sounds serious. Are you going to be okay? She asked, reaching for my hand. The doctors say the procedure has a high success rate, I assured her. The problem is the cost. $8,000 is impossible on my salary, especially with my student loans. 8,000, Amanda repeated, her brow furrowing. She was silent for a moment, then stood up abruptly. Wait here. She disappeared into her bedroom while I sat frozen, uncertain what to expect. When she returned, she was carrying a small metal lockbox. She sat back down beside me and opened it, revealing a small stack of cash and some documents. I have $650 saved, she said, counting out bills. It's for Tyler's birthday party next month and some school supplies he needs, but that can wait. Health comes first. I stared at her in shock. Amanda, no, I can't take your savings. Yes, you can, she insisted, pressing the money into my hand. You're my sister. We help each other. My eyes welled with tears, and this time they weren't part of my act. But what about Tyler's birthday? We'll do something simple at home. She shrugged. He won't know the difference as long as there's cake and his friends are there. I felt physically ill looking at the cash in my hand. This was money Amanda genuinely couldn't spare, yet she was offering it without hesitation, willing to sacrifice her son's birthday celebration for what she believed was my urgent medical need. This isn't enough for the procedure, I protested weakly. It's a start, Amanda said firmly. Maybe Mom can help too, and I can pick up more shifts at the convenience store. We'll figure it out, Jade. That's what family does. I wanted to confess everything right then, to tell her about my lottery win and assure her she would never have to work multiple jobs again. The words were on the tip of my tongue, but I held back, needing to complete my experiment before revealing the truth. Thank you, I whispered instead, carefully placing the money on the coffee table between us. Let me think about this, okay? I want to explore all my options before taking your savings. Amanda nodded, though she looked ready to argue further. Just promise me you won't delay the procedure because of money. Your health is too important. Tyler burst back into the room at that moment, saving me from having to respond. Mom, Auntie Jay, I finished Mars and it looks awesome. I spent the next hour helping Tyler with his solar system project, my mind reeling from the contrast between my father's rejection and my sister's immediate selfless offer of help. Amanda, who had so little, was willing to give everything. My father, who had more than enough, wasn't willing to give anything. The next day I visited my mother at her small house in an older neighborhood near the hospital where she worked. The yard was well kept with carefully tended flower beds lining the walkway to the front door. My mother took great pride in her garden, spending hours tending to it despite her arthritis. She answered the door in her nursing scrubs, clearly just home from a shift. Her face lit up when she saw me, and she pulled me into a tight hug that smelled of hospital antiseptic and the lavender lotion she always used. Jade. What a nice surprise. Come in, come in. I just put on some tea. I followed her into the cozy kitchen where photos of Amanda Tyler and me covered the refrigerator. The house was modest, but impeccably clean with furniture that had been carefully maintained for decades. My mother had never been one for extravagance, preferring to spend what little extra money she had on gifts for others rather than luxuries for herself. She moved slowly, favoring her right knee as she prepared our tea. I noticed her wince as she reached for the sugar bowl in an upper cabinet. "How's the arthritis, Mom?" I asked. "Oh, some days are better than others," she said dismissively. "The new medication helps a bit, but enough about that. How are you, sweetheart? You look tired." As always, my mother's perceptiveness caught me off guard. I had come prepared to tell my story, but found myself hesitating. This was the woman who had worked double shifts to put food on our table after the divorce, who had foregone new clothes for herself, so Amanda and I could have what we needed for school. "What is it?" she asked, concern deepening the lines around her eyes. "Something's bothering you. I can tell." I sighed, realizing there was no gentle way to do this. I explained my fabricated medical situation, watching as worry clouded her face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked when I finished. "How long have you been dealing with this alone?" "I didn't want to worry you," I said truthfully. "You have enough on your plate." She reached across the table to take my hand in hers, her nurse's hands roughened by years of work and frequent washing. "I'm your mother, Jade. Your worries are my worries, always." I swallowed hard. "The thing is, Mom, I need $8,000 for this procedure. My insurance won't cover it." "8,000?" She repeated, her expression thoughtful rather than shocked. Without hesitation, she rose and went to a drawer near the kitchen phone. She returned with a folder of documents and spread them on the table. "I've been saving for years," she explained, showing me a bank statement. "A little each month just in case one of you kids ever needed help. It's not much, just over 5,000, but it's yours." I shook my head, a lump forming in my throat. "Mom, I can't take that. That's your emergency fund." "And what do you think this is?" she countered gently. "An emergency. Besides, I can take out a second mortgage on the house if needed. The interest rates are good right now." I was stunned. My mother, living on a nurse's salary, dealing with worsening arthritis, was not only offering her entire savings, but was willing to take on additional debt to help me. The contrast with my father's response couldn't have been more stark. "Mom, no, the house is your security," I protested. "You're my daughter," she replied simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way it did. To my mother, family wasn't about convenience or appearances. It was about sacrifice and unconditional love. I found myself fighting back tears for the second time in 2 days, but for entirely different reasons. The guilt of my deception felt crushing now, seeing how readily my mother and sister would sacrifice for me. "Let me think about it," I managed to say. "There might be other options." "Whatever you need," she agreed. "But don't wait too long. Health isn't something to gamble with, believe me." As I left my mother's house that evening, I was overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. Amanda and my mother, the two people with the least financial security, had immediately offered everything they had to help me. My father and Diane, living in luxury, had offered nothing but excuses and condescension. The results of my experiment were becoming clear, but they brought me no satisfaction. Instead, I felt a growing sense of shame about my deception, coupled with profound gratitude for the genuine love of my mother and sister. What had started as a simple test was evolving into a painful but illuminating journey through the true meaning of family. Over the next 2 weeks, I expanded my experiment to include extended family members. My Uncle Frank had always been vocal about his business success, frequently posting on social media about his investment victories and entrepreneurial insights. His tech consulting company had apparently done well enough for him to purchase a vacation home in Florida and send his children to expensive private schools. I arranged to meet Uncle Frank for lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown, where he arrived 20 minutes late, immediately launching into a story about a client who had just signed a six-figure contract with his firm. He ordered the most expensive steak on the menu and a bottle of wine that cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 weeks. When I finally had the chance to share my fictional medical dilemma, his reaction was predictable yet disappointing. He expressed appropriate concern, assured me he would look into some options, and promised to make some calls to see if he could help. By the end of lunch, he had skillfully changed the subject back to his recent vacation in Barbados without making any concrete offer of assistance. "Let me see what I can do, Jade," he said as we parted, giving me a pat on the shoulder. "These things can be complicated. I'll be in touch soon." 2 weeks later, I was still waiting for his call. My Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister, reacted even worse. When I visited her home in an affluent suburb and explained my situation, her response was immediate and cutting. "This is exactly what happens when you don't plan properly," she said, stirring her tea with a silver spoon. "I've always told your mother that you girls need to be more responsible with money." Despite being a successful real estate developer who regularly posted about her philanthropic activities on social media, Aunt Susan offered no financial assistance. Instead, she gave me a lecture about the importance of emergency funds and comprehensive insurance coverage, as if I had somehow chosen to be in this predicament. "I'd love to help, dear, but it would set a bad precedent," she explained coolly. "You need to learn to stand on your own feet. It builds character." As my experiment continued, word of my medical problems began circulating through the family grapevine. I received a text from Diane asking if I'd looked into medical credit cards as she'd suggested. My father called once briefly to see if I'd resolved my situation, but made no mention of financial help. The tension came to a head at a family dinner hosted by my Aunt Susan, ostensibly to celebrate my cousin Megan's acceptance to graduate school. I hadn't planned to attend, feeling increasingly uncomfortable about my deception, but Amanda insisted we go together for moral support. The dinner was held in the private room of an expensive restaurant. Amanda and I arrived a few minutes late, having had to drop Tyler off at a friend's house for the evening. As we approached the table, I overheard my father's voice. "I think she's exaggerating the whole thing," he was saying to Uncle Frank. "You know, Jade has always been dramatic." "Probably just wants attention," Uncle Frank agreed. "Or money." "Did she try that story on you too?" I froze in the doorway, Amanda bumping into me from behind. Before I could retreat, Aunt Susan spotted us and waved us over with forced enthusiasm. An awkward silence fell as we took our seats, making it obvious they had been discussing me. The dinner proceeded with superficial pleasantries, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. When the conversation inevitably turned to my health issues, Diane spoke up. "Jade, darling, have you looked into those financial assistance programs I mentioned? There are options for people in your situation." The condescension in her tone made something snap inside me. "What situation would that be, Diane?" "Well, you know." She waved her hand, vaguely diamond rings glittering under the restaurant lighting. "People who haven't prepared properly for medical emergencies." Amanda bristled beside me. "Not everyone has the luxury of preparing for everything, Diane. Some of us are just trying to make it week to week." "That's exactly the problem with your generation," Aunt Susan interjected. "No financial planning, no forethought. easy to plan when you start with advantages, Amanda shot back. Some of us didn't have the benefit of parents paying for college or helping with down payments on houses. The conversation was quickly deteriorating when my cousin Jackson, Aunt Susan's son, unexpectedly spoke up. At 25, he was the youngest adult at the table and usually remained quiet during family disagreements. "I have some savings," he said directly to me, "about 12,000 from my job at the tech startup. You can have it for your procedure, Jade. No rush to pay it back." The table fell silent. Jackson had never been particularly close to me yet. Here he was offering his entire savings without hesitation. Aunt Susan looked at her son in shock. "Jackson, that's your house down payment fund," she protested. He shrugged. "I can save more. Jade needs it now." Before I could respond to this unexpected offer, my father cleared his throat. "Jade has always been bad with money. Lending to her is throwing good money after bad." The casual cruelty of his statement hung in the air for a moment before Amanda exploded. "How dare you?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Jade has been helping me with Tyler for years, even when she could barely afford her own expenses. She's the most responsible person I know." "Amanda, please," my mother, who had been quiet until now, tried to calm the situation. "This isn't the place." "No, I think it's exactly the place," Amanda continued, her cheeks flushed with anger. "I'm tired of the way certain people in this family look down on those of us who haven't had every advantage. Jade needs help with this serious medical issue, and instead of offering support, you're questioning her character." The argument escalated, with years of unspoken tension suddenly erupting at the dinner table. Aunt Susan criticized my mother's parenting, Uncle Frank defended my father, and Diane made cutting remarks about Amanda's life choices. Only Jackson, my mother, and I remained relatively quiet as the long, simmering family divisions burst into the open. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I stood up abruptly. "I need some air," I managed to say before rushing out of the restaurant. Outside, in the cool evening air, I leaned against the brick wall, fighting back tears. My experiment had spiraled out of control, causing pain and conflict I never intended. The clear division in my family between those who would help unconditionally and those who would judge and withhold was painful to witness. Amanda found me a few minutes later, putting her arm around my shoulders. "I'm sorry about that," she said, "but I couldn't listen to them talk about you that way." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "I never should have mentioned my medical issues to everyone." "No, they're the ones who should be sorry," she insisted. "Family is supposed to support each other. Mom taught us that." As we stood there, I came to a decision. The experiment had gone far enough. It was time to end the deception and reveal the truth, starting with those who had shown me true compassion and love. The following Saturday, I invited both Amanda and my mother to my apartment. I had spent hours the night before with Maria, my financial advisor, discussing the best way to share my news and help my family. We had developed a comprehensive plan that would ensure financial security for both my mother and sister while still allowing them to maintain control over their own lives. When they arrived, both looked concerned, clearly expecting an update on my fabricated medical condition. I had tidied my small apartment meticulously and prepared tea and cookies, needing something to occupy my hands during what would be a difficult conversation. "Are you okay, honey?" my mother asked immediately, her eyes scanning me for signs of illness. "You look worried." "I'm fine, Mom," I assured her as we all settled in my living room. "Better than fine, actually, but I have something important to tell you both." Amanda and my mother exchanged glances, their concern evident. "I haven't been completely honest with you," I began, my heart pounding. "There is no medical condition. I don't need surgery. I made it all up." Their expressions shifted from concern to confusion. "I don't understand," Amanda said. "Why would you lie about something like that?" Taking a deep breath, I revealed the truth. 6 weeks ago, I won the lottery, the Mega Millions jackpot. After taxes, I received $47 million. Silence fell over the room. My mother's hand went into her chest in shock, and Amanda's mouth literally dropped open. "You won what?" Amanda finally managed to say. $47 million, I repeated. "I claimed it through a blind trust to protect my identity. No one knows except my financial advisor and attorney. And now you two." "But why the story about needing medical help?" My mother asked, her voice unsteady. This was the hardest part to explain. "I was afraid of how the money might change my relationships. I've read so many stories about lottery winners whose lives were destroyed by sudden wealth. I wanted to see who would help me when I truly needed it before they knew I had anything to give." Amanda's expression darkened as understanding dawned. "So it was a test you were testing us." The hurt in her voice made me wince. "It wasn't meant to be manipulative," I tried to explain. "I just needed to know who I could trust, who truly cared about me versus who might only be interested in what I could give them." "And what did you learn?" my mother asked quietly. "I learned that the people with the least to give were the most generous," I said, tears forming in my eyes. "You both offered everything you had without hesitation. Dad and Diane, with all their wealth, offered nothing but excuses." Amanda stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to me. "You should have trusted us," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "We're your family. You didn't need to trick us." "You're right," I admitted. "It was wrong of me. I got caught up in this idea of protecting myself and didn't consider how it would affect you. I'm truly sorry." My mother reached for my hand. "We understand you were scared, Jade. Money can do strange things to people, but we would have been happy for you regardless." "I know that now," I said, "and I want to make it right." And I explained the financial plans I had developed with Maria. For my mother, I had established a trust that would pay off her mortgage fund, her retirement, so she could stop working immediately and cover any medical expenses she might have. For Amanda, I had created a similar arrangement that would pay off her debts, provide a new home in a better school district for her and Tyler, and fund her return to college to complete her degree. "There's also a college fund for Tyler," I added, "and a separate trust for him that he'll access when he turns 25. Amanda turned back from the window, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I assured her. "You and Mom have always been there for me, even when you had nothing to spare. I want to take care of you the way you've taken care of me." "But what about your experiment with the rest of the family?" my mother asked. "What will you do about your father and the others?" It was a question I had struggled with for days. "I'm planning to reveal everything at a family gathering next weekend. I've rented a private room at the Aspen Grove restaurant and invited everyone, saying it's to discuss my medical situation." "That will be quite a revelation," my mother said cautiously. "They don't deserve a penny," Amanda declared, protective anger flashing in her eyes. "It's not about what they deserve," I replied. "It's about who I want to be. I don't want this money to make me bitter or vengeful, but I also won't let it go to people who showed they don't really care about me." Over the next week, we worked together to implement the financial plans. My mother gave notice at the hospital Amanda enrolled in classes for the upcoming semester, and we began looking at houses in neighborhoods with excellent schools for Tyler. Each step brought a mixture of joy and disbelief as the reality of our changed circumstances sank in. The meeting with the extended family was set for Saturday evening. I arrived early, nervous but resolute about what I needed to say. One by one, they filtered in my father and Diane, looking annoyed at being summoned, Uncle Frank checking his phone impatiently, Aunt Susan, her expression a mixture of concern and judgment, and finally, to my surprise, Cousin Jackson, who gave me a genuine smile as he entered. Amanda and my mother arrived last, taking seats beside me in a show of solidarity. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited to hear about my supposed medical crisis. I stood smoothing down my dress, a subtle designer piece that cost more than I would have spent on clothes in a year before my winnings. It was my first small indulgence worn specifically for this occasion. Thank you all for coming, I began. I know you're expecting an update on my health situation, but the truth is there is no medical issue. Confused murmurs broke out around the table. Let me explain, I continued. 6 weeks ago, I won the Mega Millions lottery. After taxes, I received $47 million. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps, exclamations of shock, and one dropped glass of water from Diane, who had gone completely pale. You won the lottery, my father repeated incredulously. And you didn't tell us. I wanted to see how people would treat me before they knew I had money, I explained calmly. So I created a test. I asked each of you for help with a fictitious medical emergency. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Aunt Susan. That was extremely manipulative, Jade. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but it was illuminating. Mom and Amanda, who have the least, offered everything they had without hesitation. Jackson, who I've barely spoken to in years, offered his entire savings. I turned to him with a genuine smile. Thank you for that. Jackson nodded, seeming embarrassed by the attention. I continued, my voice growing firmer. Others among you. My eyes moved to my father. Diane, Uncle Frank, and Aunt Susan offered nothing but excuses and judgment, despite having more than enough to help if you'd wanted to. Now wait just a minute, my father protested. You can't judge us based on some manipulative test. We had our reasons. Yes, you did, I interrupted. And those reasons spoke volumes. But that's not why I called you here today. I wanted you all to know about my winnings directly from me before the news potentially becomes public. And to discuss how you'll be sharing your good fortune, I assume, Uncle Frank said with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Actually, yes, I replied. I've already established trust for Mom and Amanda. They'll be taken care of for life. My father's expression darkened. And what about the rest of us? I am your father, after all. I looked at him steadily. You are. And if you had shown even a fraction of the concern and generosity that Mom did, things might be different. But you've made your priorities clear over the years, and especially in recent weeks. So, this whole thing was a setup to punish us, Diane demanded, her voice rising. No, I said firmly. It was a window into who you truly are when you thought I had nothing to offer you. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply choosing to help those who have always been there for me, regardless of what I could give them in return. Aunt Susan stood gathering her purse. I think we're done here. Come on, Jackson. To everyone's surprise, Jackson remained seated. Actually, Mom, I'd like to stay and talk with Jade. I'll catch a ride home later. The ensuing exits were awkward and tense. My father attempted to speak with me privately, suddenly interested in reconnecting, but I politely declined. Uncle Frank tried a different approach, mentioning investment opportunities he'd be happy to discuss, which I also gently refused. After they left, only Jackson, Amanda, my mother, and I remained. Jackson looked at me with newfound respect. That couldn't have been easy, he said. It wasn't, I admitted, but it was necessary. For what it's worth, he added, I think you handled it well, more gracefully than most would have. Later that evening, as Amanda, my mother, and I shared a quiet dinner, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and peace. The experiment had revealed painful truths, but also confirmed the authentic bonds I shared with those who truly mattered. What will you do now? My mother asked gently. About your father and the others. I considered her question carefully. I won't cut them out completely. They're still family. But I'll set clear boundaries. And maybe over time our relationships can heal on more honest terms. Amanda squeezed my hand. Whatever happens, we've got your back. Money or no money. Looking at their loving faces, I knew that despite all the pain and complications, I had received something far more valuable than $47 million. I had gained clarity about what truly mattered, about who truly cared, and about the kind of person I wanted to be with or without wealth. 6 months after revealing my lottery winnings, my life had settled into a new normal that balanced the extraordinary opportunities of wealth with the values and relationships that had always mattered most to me. I had approached my newfound fortune with careful deliberation, making changes gradually rather than diving into a completely different lifestyle. With Maria's guidance, I had invested the majority of my winnings to ensure long-term security and create a legacy of generosity for future generations. My most significant lifestyle change was purchasing a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a pleasant neighborhood with excellent schools. It was beautiful but not ostentatious, with a large backyard where Tyler could play and a guest suite where my mother often stayed. I also bought a reliable new SUV to replace my aging Honda, though I found myself missing my old car's familiar quirks sometimes. Perhaps most surprisingly, to those who didn't know me well, I continued working at the law firm, though I had reduced my hours to part-time. The structure and purpose of meaningful work kept me grounded, and I enjoyed the relationships I had built with colleagues over the years. Of course, I had paid off my student loans in full the day after claiming my winnings, a small but significant victory that had brought me unexpected joy. Amanda had embraced her fresh start with characteristic determination. She had moved with Tyler into a lovely 3-bedroom home just 10 minutes from mine in the same school district. She had enrolled in nursing school following in our mother's footsteps and was thriving in her studies while maintaining a close relationship with Tyler. The single mother struggling to make ends meet was now a confident student with a bright future, and her transformation was beautiful to witness. My mother had taken to retirement with reluctance at first, her identity so tied to her nursing career. But eventually she had discovered a new purpose, volunteering at a free health clinic 3 days a week, offering her expertise without the physical strain of full-time hospital work. Her arthritis had improved significantly with proper treatment, and she had begun traveling, taking modest trips to places she had always dreamed of visiting but could never afford before. Together, we had established the Collins Family Foundation, focusing on supporting single parents through education scholarships, affordable childcare programs, and emergency financial assistance. The foundation had already helped dozens of families in situations similar to what Amanda had faced, providing not just money, but mentorship and community. Working on the foundation together had strengthened our bonds and given our good fortune a purpose beyond ourselves. My relationship with my father remained complicated. After the initial revelation of my lottery winnings, he had made several attempts to reconnect, some seemingly genuine and others transparently motivated by financial interest. We had occasional dinners, carefully neutral conversations that avoided both the past and his frequent hints about investment opportunities or business ventures needing capital. Diane had made less effort, maintaining a polite but distant relationship, primarily conducted through holiday cards and brief appearances at family events. Her initial shock at my wealth had evolved into a brittle sort of competitiveness, subtle comments about their recent purchases or travel plans that suggested a need to prove they didn't need my money. Uncle Frank had taken a different approach, becoming suddenly interested in my opinions and experiences, frequently calling with friendly check-ins that inevitably turned toward discussions of his latest business idea. I maintained cordial relations but kept firm boundaries, redirecting his funding requests to formal applications through our foundation's grant process, none of which had met our criteria for support. Aunt Susan had perhaps the most surprising reaction, approaching me privately a month after our confrontation to offer a stilted but seemingly sincere apology. "I was raised to believe that financial struggles reflect moral failings," she had explained awkwardly. "I'm beginning to see how wrong that perspective is." While our relationship remained tentative, there was a new authenticity to our interactions that offered hope for genuine connection in the future. Cousin Jackson had become an unexpected ally and friend. Despite his mother's disapproval, he had accepted my offer to fund his graduate studies in social work. We met regularly for coffee, discussing his classes and his plans to work with at-risk youth. His genuine disinterest in my wealth was refreshing, and his commitment to making a difference in others' lives resonated with my own evolving values. Perhaps the most profound change was in my own perspective. The initial weeks after winning had been consumed with fear and protectiveness, concerns about being used or having my relationships distorted by money. While those concerns hadn't disappeared entirely, they had been balanced by the joy of being able to help those I loved and make a difference in my community. I had learned to set healthy boundaries without becoming cynical, to be generous without being naive. I had discovered that money, while certainly making life easier in countless practical ways, couldn't create genuine connection or heal emotional wounds. Those required time honesty and mutual effort resources available to everyone, regardless of financial status. One sunny afternoon, I sat on my back patio watching Amanda help Tyler with his science project while my mother tended to the herb garden we had planted together. The simple scene of family togetherness brought a lump to my throat. We had always been close, but the trials of the past year had forged our bonds into something even stronger and more precious. "Auntie Jay, come see my volcano," Tyler called, his face alight with excitement. "Mom helped me make it erupt without making a huge mess." As I joined them at the table, admiring the impressively controlled eruption, I reflected on the true wealth in my life. The lottery had given me financial security beyond imagination, but the most valuable aspects of my life had been there all along, in the love of those who had offered help when they thought I had nothing to give in return. The experiment that had begun as a cynical test had evolved into a journey of self-discovery and healing. I had learned that while money could certainly reveal character, it couldn't change it. Those who were generous in spirit remained so regardless of their financial circumstances, and those who were selfish or conditional in their love remained that way even when offered opportunities for connection and reconciliation. In the end, the most important lesson wasn't about who had failed my test or passed it. It was about choosing to remain open-hearted despite disappointment, to offer compassion without expecting perfection, and to value authentic connection above all else. The greatest gift of my lottery win hadn't been the freedom from financial worry, though that was certainly significant. It had been the clarity it brought about what truly mattered in life, and the opportunity to align my resources with those values. As I looked at my family, engaged in the simple joy of a science project on a Saturday afternoon, I knew with absolute certainty that I was the wealthiest woman in the world, in all the ways that truly counted. So I want to ask you, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have told everyone about your winnings immediately, or would you have conducted your own experiment? Have you ever discovered someone's true character in a moment of need? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember that true wealth isn't measured by your bank account, but by the people who stand beside you through life's challenges. Thank you for listening, and I wish you richness in all the ways that truly matter.